We've got one more piece to get through in the first half of our show, or the first third of our show. We're going long today, it feels like.
We are.
Danyal Rasool, I teed him up before, a fabulous writer for ESPNCricinfo. He was a travelling journalist on this series. He was there for every single day of it. And his reflections here on Pakistan's month in Oz. Well, joining us today is Danyal Rasool from ESPNCricinfo, the Pakistani correspondent. We've really enjoyed sharing your company across the last 3.5 weeks, and of course last year in Pakistan as well. You're making your final word debut, as it were, and I suppose you're doing so with Pakistan feeling weirdly upbeat despite losing their 17th tests in a row in Australia and 3-0 here, but it doesn't have that kind of energy. Do you sort of share that view?
It's a weird one because in Pakistan, it's hard to convey the extent to which not losing in Australia in a test match has become a national obsession. And now playing here almost feels like one of those, one of those time travel movies where whatever you try, whatever you do, ultimately you end up at the exact same destination. And even though Pakistan tried some different things and took a circuitous route, they thought they were doing things differently, they'd have a different outcome. It hasn't quite worked out that way. They can draw encouragement from the second and the third test, particularly the second. But ultimately, I think part of what makes Australia so hard for Pakistan is they've got into their heads. It's a mental challenge believing you can beat Australia in Australia. And I fear until Pakistan do it one time, they won't know how to, and they won't believe that they can.
And there's also the issue of opportunity, right? Like the last time Pakistan were here, that was 16-17, wasn't it, Adam? And it's now 2023, 24. They don't get the marquee invite every 4 years like India and England get with a one-day visit and a T20 visit in between times. There are a handful of Pakistan players who've played in the Big Bash, but not so many compared to the 480 England players who seem to come out every year and play in the BBL. And so just being used to being out here, being accustomed to the conditions and so on, unless you're Ahmed Jamal and you've somehow managed to play club cricket out here, those opportunities come around so much less frequently.
To be fair, Pakistan were also here in 2019, played a couple of test matches in Brisbane and Adelaide, but then they got swept aside. That was arguably their most miserable tour. They lost both games by an innings. David Warner scored a triple hundred. But you're right, in terms of getting opportunities in countries like Australia and even South Africa to some extent, it doesn't happen too often for Pakistan. And I thought one of the things, Mohammad Hafiz has said some interesting things, some of them aren't really to be taken seriously, but one of the things that he said that I thought was fair was what Pakistan need to try and do is make sure they have A tours, under 19 tours, and even when they come to Australia, make sure they have enough practice and warm-up games, because to be fair, Canberra isn't really the sort of surface, the Manuka Oval isn't going to prepare you for what Australia have in Perth, or even Melbourne and Sydney. St Kilda, the Junction Oval, similar, doesn't really prepare you for those conditions. So if you don't tour Australia often, the one thing you can try and do is make sure that when you do, you're prepared for it, you have a decent run in, you are accustoming yourself to the conditions well enough. And again, I think part of that is due to finances, part of that is due to scheduling. It just doesn't happen as much anymore. And for a country like Pakistan, who don't get the chance to visit Australia often, that means they are going to be caught out with regards to preparation.
I suppose the other thing leading into the series was the state of flux that Pakistan were in off the field following the World Cup exit. All the backroom staff were turned over. Mohammad Hafiz, who you touched on before, was acting director, acting coach, acting everything seemingly. How do you think that's going to play out in terms of who will ultimately end up coaching this Pakistan side into the medium term?
I think it's one of those questions that's almost impossible to answer, partially because it's got nothing to do with cricket. Mohammad Hafiz is director. The chairman is Zakir Ashraf. He was here to meet the PM in Sydney last week as well. But that has probably more to do with when general elections are held in Pakistan and which party comes out on top, because in Pakistan, the patron of the BCP is the Prime Minister. And at the moment, we've got in Pakistan a caretaker Prime Minister and consequently a caretaker chairman. The chairman can't really make any real hiring and firing decisions, which is why you saw Babar had to resign rather than be sacked. Just yesterday, Grant Bradburn announced that he was resigning. He couldn't be sacked either, even though I know that the chairman wanted to. So it's just to do with how that side of things, the political side of things, takes care of itself. And we should know more by the end of the PSL, so maybe in about 8 weeks. But the underlying point behind all this is this is really no way to run a cricket board, run in a cricket-mad country. And the fact that Pakistan had Mickey Arthur, who, for all his faults, has won a Test series as a visiting coach in Australia with South Africa about a decade ago now, or slightly more. And he was sitting at home, wasn't here part of this tour, while Mohammad Hafiz, who's never had a coaching job in his life, hasn't done any coaching badges, was both coach and team director, speaks of the dysfunction that Pakistan is unfortunately aligned with for a long time now.
So is it a surprise then that they were actually able to compete at points on the field given that instability?
Very much so, but I have my own theory about that. I do believe the real surprise was how many wickets they were able to take across the series with a severely depleted bowling attack. When they were over in 2019, they took 13 wickets all tour. The fact that it took 16, then the full 20, then 12, it's reasonably impressive because it didn't have a specialist spinner, unless you count Sargent, who played the third test. I wouldn't count Sargent. Then they had Shaheen Afridi, who was resting the third test. Haris Rauf made himself unavailable. Naseem Shah wasn't available. Khurram Shahzad was injured after that first test. My theory is it's partially to do with the fact that Ahmed Jamal is genuinely very good and they've been sleeping on him, but also there's not enough of the Australian top order who I believe are in peak form. Mitchell Marsh, I thought obviously had a really good series, and Marnus sort of came back strongly towards the end. But I think they were slightly helped by the fact that Australia's batters are also slightly finding their feet. Having said that, the fact that Shan Masood was captain, who while his batting has always been in question, I thought tactically he was very adept and should get better if Pakistan continue to play more Test cricket. But I think it was a bit of a confluence of factors. So some of the pitches helped bowlers. Some of the bowlers were potentially better than you expected, and it isn't exactly a legendary Australian batting lineup. And I think that means Pakistan had slightly more chances to edge Australia out in a couple of games than they would otherwise have had.
Yeah, there's definitely, bowlers are in the game more in Australia in the last couple of years than they were in the decade or so before that for the most part. I wondered if there might be, if partly it might have almost been an advantage that you had these fringe players coming through and new players coming through because, like you said, if at the start of the series, had you picked Pakistan's first choice attack, it would have been Shaheen, Naseem Shah and Haris Rauf would have been the three quicks lining up. Only one of them was there. He only played 2 of the Test matches, but that gave opportunities to Mir Hamza to do what he did in Melbourne and to Jamal to work his way into the series and Hassan Ali to come back in. It sort of worked for India a couple of years ago, getting down into the further into the depth, I suppose, into the ranks, and giving players an opportunity who really didn't have anything to lose and freshening things up. Do you think that might have actually worked in Pakistan's favour?
I think it might have helped with the pressure and expectations. It's good you mentioned India because no one ever reminds you of how India won a series here. Every time you talk about
no, incredibly, no one talks about it.
Every time I tried to talk about how depleted this Pakistan side was, I'd have someone saying, "Well, India did it. Why can't Pakistan?" I think part of it is that the pressure was off, but then the big issue with Pakistan, I believe, is it's hard to take encouragement from a series when you don't know what's going to happen in 6 months' time. So if this is a solid foundation to build on, then sure, you can say 3-0 in Australia, it happens. They were decent, they competed in Melbourne and Sydney, and so this is something to build on. But then Pakistan's next test is in 8 months in August against Bangladesh. You don't know who the chairman's going to be. You don't know who the captain, arguably, even is going to be, because there's such a state of flux in Pakistani cricket. And I think that's the real worry. In the last 3 years, despite how little cricket Pakistan play, they've given out 16 Test debuts. No other side has done that, even side that play a lot more Test cricket. And that, I think, is part of the problem, that it's hard to know what to expect when Pakistan play next, and hard to know what success and failure looks like and how the PCB will measure that and judge that. And if Pakistan had these solid foundations, then they could use the series as a springboard. But until such time, every series is almost looked at as its own individual series and own individual episode. And that, I think, is the real dysfunction at the heart of Pakistan cricket.
It's a good point. I mean, if this was a foundation with Babar Azam being desperately out of form, with Shaheen Shah Afridi only playing 2 of the 3 Test matches, if there is clearly headroom there, right, under Shan Masood, with 2 global superstars not performing at their best in this series, or in Shaheen's case, not being picked for the third test, resting up for the T20 series. Shan has talked so much about wanting to play more test cricket. Jeff and I have reflected a number of times around the fact that there's only 9 further test matches for Pakistan in this WTC cycle, so 4 series of 2, plus England coming out late this year for 3 to Pakistan. 2 against Bangladesh in August, 3 in December, November against England, and that's your lot for 2024. But Shan does want things to change. He's spoken stridently about this in all of his media engagements. He wants more test cricket than is currently being played. I'm just interested in that piece to this, that if Shan does have the ability to shape this team over a number of years, perhaps the way that Misbah Al-Haq was able to take them from a very low ebb to the top of the world in 2016, whether he might have the authority to get more test matches played in Pakistan and influence at least the home schedule.
I think what Shan's doing there is slightly impressive in one way, because what he understands is that being test captain means more than just picking which bowler to bowl the next spell. It's a wider responsibility towards cricket and towards test cricket in Pakistan, and I think that's the mantle that he's trying to take up and run with. Part of it, again, has to do with how many teams want to play Pakistan due to the finances, due to viewership, due to eyeballs, due to how exciting, I guess, Pakistan cricket is, and that's the bit that he can control. He's trying to control that by trying to be more aggressive with his field settings, with his bowling changes, with the way he bats. He's led by example there. I think aside from Mitchell Marsh, he had the highest strike rate of any batter across both sides this series. Again, the unknown is how long Shan will be there, because only 4 tests ago, Shan wasn't part of the side when England was over in Pakistan last year. He only came in for the 3rd test, and he'd been dropped before that. His 32 test matches have come across 9 different stints. So it's hard to shape a side in your image when you don't know how long you are going to be in that side. And I can very easily see 2 or 3 innings, or maybe a couple of series where Shan has a bad run, and those sorts of whispers come up again. If he can. I think he's a good man to lead Pakistan forward, not necessarily on the field, but because of how he can advocate for it, off it. For all of Babar's qualities, that's something I don't think he was ever really able to do effectively. But again, if it happens, it'll have to happen in a structure, in an ecosystem that is ever changing, and Shan somehow sort of has to continue to navigate that, which requires luck more than it does skill sometimes in Pakistan cricket.
Yeah, and at the time where everything shifts again, focus to the T20 form of the game, that's where you're off to now. You're flying to New Zealand today. It's 5 T20s over there?
Yep, 5 T20s, with Shaheen Afridi as captain for the first time. Yep.
Right, okay, so we'll be paying attention to Pakistan as we build up to that T20 World Cup in America and the West Indies, with Pakistan playing their group games in the States, where Jeff and I will be in all probability. So we'll hopefully catch up with you there. Danyal Rasool, you've had a brilliant tour personally. Your writing has been outstanding. It really has shaped the conversation in Australia. Safe travels. Thanks for joining us on the podcast, and we'll catch up soon.
Thank you. It's been really good to be here and share press box with all of you. Take care.